I did want to start. Father Dennis introduced me, and I've been in Fall River for a little over 9 years now, and 23 years in the Archdiocese of Boston before that. So I've worked for the Catholic Church now for over 32 years. So that makes me two things. Number one, a glutton for punishment. And number two, a person of great faith. And I know all you here are people of great faith as well, and we thank you for your service to the church. And also, that master's program at Villanova, I highly recommend. It's a great program. If anybody's interested in it, they can talk to me at a break, and I can put you in touch with the folks there. And also, I have 4 grown children. My wife Sue and I live in Marshfield, or Marsh Vegas, as we like to call it. And it's official, I do not miss the commute from Marshfield to Brighton. So I figured that out today. So we're going to have 6 learning objectives for this session. And my hope for you is to come away with a better understanding of what temporal administration or governance is in its evolution in the church over the years, the impact it has on pastors today, especially with the church in decline, and many of our parishes are in decline, in the Northeast anyway. But by the way, I'm going to use the term pastor, but I also know there's a lot of parishes now that have administrators, but for all intents and purposes, they operate as a pastor. We're going to explore emerging models of temporal administration and the impact they have or could have on pastors and their lay leadership, what pastors and their lay leadership could focus more on as a result of the implementation of those new models, that partnering with your archdiocese or diocese during the process is key, and then finally being practical about how we go about this change. So what's first covered in this session, a lot of it's going to be hopeful, but to some of you, it may be a little bit discouraging. But I want to be upfront with the overarching and positive messages of this session is that the church isn't going anywhere. It's going to be with us until the end of time. And Christ is going to be with us until the end of time. And as Jesus told his disciples during the ascension, I'll be with you always, even to the end of the age. So that's encouraging, right? We get that going for us. So let's never forget that despite the times we're in. We win in the end. Christ comes alongside to walk with us through the pains and struggles of life. And there'll be plenty of those during times of change. And God also gives us comfort with Christ's love. And we became a recipient of Christ's love at spiritual birth. And Christ's love can cast out fears and anxieties that keep us all from collaboration and change. So we often approach these periods of change in these processes, we approach them from a human standpoint. But if we just took more time to focus on Christ, things would go a lot smoother. And God's given us fellowship in the Spirit. We need to listen more to the fruits that he bears in our lives to help us be more collaborative and open to change. When we're in discord, we often focus on our own pain, but the fact God gave us tenderness and compassion, we must try and focus more on that so we serve the needs of those we're in conflict with. Not easy, I know. And to develop the right attitudes, we must try and have the same thoughts or outcomes, to be more like-minded, to be more servant-minded. And collaboration and change cannot be achieved if only a few have this mindset. We need to ask the Lord to help us develop it. We must have the same loving attitude and need to be more united in the Spirit to care for one another, as though we're caring for ourselves. So on this slide, I wanted to point out the church's mission. And there are various definitions of that, but I do like this one in particular, to bring all men and women into communion with God through Christ and into the fullness of the kingdom. So the mission of the church is never going to change. It was given to Jesus' disciples and handed down to us. But the big question is, how do our priests and laity, how do we all live out that mission today? And how do we live it out in the future as a result of this ongoing and impending change? We need to live it out despite the change, okay? Not to change beliefs or practices, but being open to change to be able to more effectively live out those beliefs and practices. So I did want to talk about temporal administration. Obviously, that's the whole focus. And I just wanted to give you a quick definition. In the church, temporal administration refers to the management of its material and financial resources, what canon law calls temporal goods. These include property, money, investments, human resources, other assets used to support the church's mission. At the level of an individual Catholic parish, temporal administration refers to the stewardship and management of the parish's material resources, its buildings, finances, assets. So they serve the church's spiritual mission effectively and responsibly. So who does temporal administration? Or what does temporal administration encompass? Property management, maintaining the church building, parish hall, rectory, all the facilities, financial oversight, budgeting, accounting, forecasting, fundraising, ensuring transparency with your parishioners, personnel matters, paying staff, hiring staff, managing that staff, and ensuring just wages, legal compliance, following civil laws related to property, employment, and insurance. And there's a myriad of other things that we won't have time to get to this morning. But who's responsible? The pastor is the canonical administrator per Canon 532, acting in the name of the parish. A parish finance council required by Canon 537 assists the pastor with financial planning and oversight. And the diocesan bishop supervises and may issue norms that guide parish administration. So there's a lot having to do with temporal administration and governance, especially today. It used to be a lot easier, though, as this slide depicts. Very few policies and procedures to abide by. If the pastor wanted work done, it was with a handshake. The threat of the parish being sued was limited. Very few federal and state laws. Parish facilities and grounds were newer and in relatively good shape. And these last two are key. Plenty of parishioners, plenty of money. What church temporal life has become, it gets pretty complicated. Policies and procedures up the wazoo now, especially from yours truly, the Chancery. Greater chance of lawsuits, whether it be slip and falls or something else. Any work that needs to be done requires a contract, and that contract needs to be reviewed. Parish facilities and grounds, in many cases, are in poor shape. Many federal and state laws, especially around human resource practices, and just having a pastor just trying to manage a staff with HR best practices is challenging, to say the least. And sadly, fewer parishioners, and as a result, less revenue. And now we have, or have had for some time now, the current situation where archdiocesan administrations want to enable best practices for all of its parishes and schools, regardless of temporal administration. But we hit a lot of roadblocks along the way. Many pastors don't have the time nor the talent to oversee the complexities of today's temporal administration environment. Many pastors manage multiple parishes and properties. Some become pastors not too long after ordination. How's that working out? I can tell you from Fall River, not great. Staff morale suffers, both the staff at the Chancery and even at the local level. Like, is this all fixable? And finally, we have to continue to keep new models a top priority, but have to go about it in the spirit of collaboration between diocesan administrations and parishes. So just some things to consider as we go about planning for these new models. There's canon law that's going to always impact what dioceses can do and cannot do when it comes to governance. that priests are ordained to teach, sanctify, and the big G word, govern. So how does some of that governing get given up without offending our pastors? The lack of knowledge, skills, and abilities in the field. This is a big one, and I'll get into this later. But just as important as freeing up more time for priests to teach and sanctify, we need to be a lot more efficient and effective at temporal administration within all of our parishes and schools. We need good communication and ongoing communication with all of those that'll be impacted in the future. The commitment of the local bishop to new models is obviously key. And finally, building trust. And I'll touch on that in a bit later as well. As I prepared for sessions like this in the past, I wanted to bring pastoral life into this, okay? Not just temporal life. I'll talk to friends and colleagues about this topic. And my friend Dave had a good reflection that I want to share. I asked him to reflect on the church of his youth compared to how he sees the church today, sort of then and now. Dave talked about the church as the center of community. It was complete, both in spiritual needs as well as emotional. His church provided structure in otherwise crazy times. With similar values and economic status, the church community caused an extended family, where the local priests were engaged with families. Priests were held in high esteem and carried themselves in a manner that earned it. Each neighborhood had their own parish. Credit unions became a part of filling the needs of parishioners. Although only connected by name, it felt assuring. We had somewhere to go when needed. The churches were surrounded by neighborhood ethnic bakeries and local grocers that were part of your after-church visit, where people met and continued their bonding. Everyone walked to church. Neighbors would meet and walk to church. Church was generational and expected. We were at Mass with our grandparents who still instilled Christian values, particularly respect for God and the church. They believed that was all you needed to figure the rest of your life out. Catechism was helpful in terms of education. Taking our sacraments was a time of accomplishment and growth. And as this slide depicts, and what Dave spoke to, the parish was the center of community, part of the family structure, generational, strong and lasting relationships built, many volunteers and many priests. What church pastoral life has become. And this isn't in every case, okay? A little disclaimer there. The church is less relevant today. It used to be when you missed Mass or not be a part of parish activities, we'd say, wow, what's wrong with that family? And today, when you attend Mass or take part in parish activities, people say, wow, what's wrong with that family? There's a much smaller volunteer base, less vibrant liturgies and homilies because everything else that's going on that gobbles up the pastor's time. It's a much smaller community. The demographics have shifted as well, especially out of urban areas and into the suburbs. And finally, fewer priests, and that impacts both pastoral life and temporal life. So with our church in decline, I would argue that it leads to fewer priests, the state of parish life declining, and with that, a decline in the number of parishioners. So let's unpack that a bit. In retrospect, I'm just going to go past this slide because it's a little redundant. I apologize. So obviously, the issue with fewer priests, that can't get unnoticed, right? Today, one pastor for multiple parishes isn't only unrealistic, it's unhealthy. We have priests newly ordained or recently ordained becoming pastors when in an earlier time it would have been 20 years plus before they became a pastor, and they would have benefited from working alongside the pastors before them. This situation has created a morale crisis in the presbyterate. This isn't what they signed up for. There's a lot of burnout, depression, substance abuse, and in some cases, Pastors going off the rails and need to go on leave, making the situation even more dire. Pastors cannot effectively tend to their flock, nor do they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to run all the facilities, while at the same time celebrating Mass, baptisms, First Communions, funerals, etc., and just being present with their people. This also leads to, in some cases, pastors being taken advantage of. His staff knows that he's stretched too thin, and in many cases, that staff isn't doing the job that they're being paid to do, nor in some cases even know how to do it. Also, the specter of clergy abuse that still lingers even after 20 plus years. Being falsely accused is still a worry, it's still a thing. And all this contributes to an inability to effectively lead and evangelize. There's some additional factors as to why individual parishes decline, and some more than others. I'll point out some factors here we haven't touched on yet. Same old programs, music, and events led by the same people. And we call them the usual suspects. Ultimately, this is the pastor's problem, but that's another session. Legacy staff that won't pass the torch. This is part of succession planning. But there's a lot, and I mean a lot of parish staff out there that probably could retire, but don't, because it's still a big part of their lives. And I get that. I mean, I've been doing it for over 30 years. The problem is it's now becoming more about those individuals than about moving the church forward. A focus on doing things right instead of doing the right things. I'll give you an example. My parish had for over 10 years the same Easter Vigil liturgy. Came off without a hitch every year. Everything was done right, but it became incredibly unpredictable and boring. And no one focused on perhaps making it better, to do the right things. So goes many of the other programs in parishes, their masses, etc. You might have a lot of things down where it's all getting done right, but those things might be turning people off or keeping them away. As the old adage goes, but this is how we've always done it. There are fewer parish events, and with that, fewer opportunities to volunteer. And finally, no budgeting for mission. In many cases, finance councils drive the budget decisions with the pastor, and the focus is usually on the buildings and grounds when they should be focused on evangelization opportunities. We've discussed the state of temporal and pastoral life, today pointing to a church in decline, which has led to fewer priests, a decline in parish life, and with that, a decline in parish life, fewer parishioners. And this is a sample of what happens as a result of that. And this should come as no surprise. Parishes not as vibrant as they could be or should be. They have the same parishioners who volunteer. And with that, these same volunteer parishioners are stressed out because they're always the ones that are being asked to help out. Pastors can't effectively evangelize, in many cases, are preaching to the choir, if you will. Less revenue coming in to do the things that need to be done. It's oftentimes difficult for the pastor or maybe an incoming pastor to implement change. There's a greater chance that parish is going to be on the watch list for closing or merging with another parish. I did a webinar on that a couple of years ago for the summer conference series. And finally, with the decrease in revenue, there's rarely an opportunity to establish or build on a rainy day fund for emergencies or capital repairs. So let's talk about pastors, as they're the focal point in this discussion, followed by lay leaders. The pastor can't be all things to all people, but that's how the church is set up. He's the quarterback, responsible for the teaching, sanctifying, and governing through holy orders, as mentioned. And that worked years ago when there were more priests, more parishioners, and more money. The situation today is that he really can't be all things to all people, or at least not be effective at it. And this leads me to the governance problem. For any canon law lovers watching, Canon 1008 defines the sacrament of holy orders at ordination, and it states that once ordained, the priest is consecrated and designated to teach, sanctify, and govern. And that's reasonable, but let's unpack it a bit. And please don't think I have a problem with holy orders, okay? I love the priesthood, okay? I've dedicated more than 30 years of my life to it. My brother-in-law is just ordained 30 years, and he's the pastor of St. Bonaventure in Plymouth. In fact, just an aside, when he went to seminary from 90 to 95, my wife, Sue and I lived in West Roxbury, so the chapel became our parish, if you will. We'd go there every week when he was in seminary. So it was great to have Mass in there today because it has a soft spot in my heart. So I did want to say, like, just watch where my finger's pointing. Don't try to bite it off. When it comes to governance and temporal administration, and the two can arguably be used interchangeably, all right? We're talking about everything the pastor has to deal with unrelated to evangelization. Finance, facilities, again, we talked about this, human resources, contracts, safe environment. 50 years ago, I'd bet that pastors spent more than half their time in teaching and sanctifying. Governance wasn't too big a deal, as I previously mentioned. People got paid under the table. Work with vendors was with a handshake. There were no federal and state guidelines for payroll and taxes and workers' compensation. For the most part, it was a cash business, so you didn't have to be an expert in finance or accounting either. But I would argue that today, pastors spend close to 2/3 of their time in governance and roughly 1/3 in teaching and sanctifying. So just indulge me for a minute as a business person, and please forgive the business references here. I know the church isn't a business, quote unquote, but it is business-like in many ways. There's no way around that. So let's call teaching and sanctifying sales. It's where the priest operates to attract and retain customers. And governance we'll call operations. So if our pastors are the sales force, when the situation today is that they're spending more time in operations and less time in sales, we wonder why we're losing customers, right? It's an interesting way to think about it. And some additional thoughts here that I want to make clear and that are particularly important. Developing new models to lessen the time priests and pastors spend in governance are not being designed to take away anything from their priesthood or their holy orders. The hope is that it will enhance their priesthood, giving them more time to do what they were taught more of in seminary to do, right? Some pastors may say they don't spend that much time in governing and temporal administration. That may be true in some cases, but what concerns me is whether or not pastors know if their staff know how to do their jobs, right? Most parishes, and I'm talking about the administrative folks, not the pastoral folks. Most parishes most likely have one or two people on staff in the administrative side of the house. Number one, that they think they know what they're doing, know they're struggling at their job, but don't say anything about that, and tell the pastor things are in good shape. They're really not. So the reason I know this is going on over 9 years now, I see or hear about this at least once a month in my job, about folks out there that are struggling, okay? So we just spent the past 2.5 years trying to get parishes and schools on the same payroll platform. Pastors told us, we don't want to do this. My staff does payroll fine, so why are you guys meddling? But we kept pushing forward because we knew that things weren't fine with payroll. It was the Wild West out there. And when we really get into it, it turned out to be more like Escape from New York, not the Wild West. And anybody under 40 probably won't get the Escape from New York reference anyway. So let's now talk about some emerging models out there. Some archdioceses and dioceses have introduced or are introducing the concept of deacon administrators or lay administrators with canonical authority for certain responsibilities under Canon 517-2. And this is a good approach given the limited number of priests, but the disparate skill sets out there of those parish staffs that I was talking about. There's some good and some not, but in many ways the same operational model remains. It's just replaced by a deacon for the temporal administration. So I think this might be a good way to sort of bridge the gap to eventually get to what I want to talk about. Some have separately incorporated parishes and schools with their own boards. I think Providence has that. I think in most cases with this model, the staff doesn't change and the pastor is part of the board. So I don't see how this model frees up his time from the administrative stuff. Fall River is a corporation sole, and so is Boston. And then to address just facilities, the Archdiocese of Detroit outsources their property management to an outside firm. But I'm not sure how effective this is, but I can only imagine that it is effective because it does take a lot of burden off the pastors for facilities. But the model I want to focus more on is where parishes would effectively outsource their temporal administration to their diocese, okay? And we're in the early stages of developing such a model in Fall River. Whether it could or should be done centrally or regionally or a combination of the two remain to be seen. The services provided to the parish would be outlined in a service level agreement or partnership agreement between the pastor and his parishes in the diocese. And I just want to make the point at the bottom that there's various models and there's going to be models that vary from diocese to diocese. It's not a one size fits all. In many ways we're the same, but in many ways different. And another big reason why we're looking at this new model in Fall River is that we've had to, more than 20 of our guys, or 25% of the workforce, has had to leave one way or the other, either temporarily or permanently. So we know that there's a crisis of morale, okay? And what the bishop, my Bishop d'Acunha just started, launched back in December was our Stronger Priests, Stronger Parishes, Stronger Church initiative. And it's really designed, the whole focus is on the priest and the success of the priest, mentally, physically, spiritually. And we hired a director of clergy support 3 years ago. And it's been it's had huge impact. And it's just one person, and he's been a blessing. We could use 5, but before that, when some of those guys were having to leave, we didn't have anybody that could handle them, right? So now we have somebody that's dedicated to that. But we got to thinking about this, and it's like, in the church, we spend much of our time in triage and tactics, right? And never any time in strategy. So we had to reel it in and say, all right, we just can't be reacting to this stuff over and over and over again. It's not going to change. So we decided to become more proactive, more strategic. And that's where this Stronger Priests, Stronger Parishes, Stronger Church initiative was launched. But a big part of it is going to be training, more training at the local level, at least on the administrative side of the house, more training at the local level, but also talking about trying to implement a model like this where we would take over more and more of that stuff. So we've touched on some of these already, but these are the key areas that would get outsourced. Finance and accounting, and I would add budgeting to that. Facilities management, IT, human resources, safe environment, cemetery management, marketing and communications, and development or fundraising. And by the way, I see everyone taking pictures. I'm happy to email this deck to anybody that's looking for it. So it's not copyrighted or anything. Don't worry about that. Yeah. So how would it work? Pastors would maintain a staff, but primarily on the pastoral side of the house. DRE, pastoral associate, youth minister, etc. And then also maintain one or two people to act as a liaison to the diocese and to also do things that need to be done. Answering the door, the phone, scheduling masses, weddings, funerals, all that tactical stuff. And all services, as I mentioned, would be outlined in an agreement. However, there are going to be things that come up from time to time that aren't routine or that are unscheduled or emergency in nature. For example, a pastor's having performance issues with his DRE that are out of the ordinary. There might be a central number he calls, or maybe there's something online that generates a ticket, if you will, for service, and that would quickly get to the appropriate area of expertise, either centrally or regionally. In this case, human resources, and someone would be deployed to assist the pastor. There'd be a biweekly or monthly check-in with pastors to see how things are going, and also to bring the pastor up to speed on how things are with the parish from a temporal standpoint. Most importantly, finances. Some parishes are going to need more attention than others, depending on who the pastor is or who the staff liaison is, but that's fine and expected. So as I mentioned, we're in the middle of that planning process to see what this would look like, and we're hoping to leave no stone unturned. Everything that goes on at the local parish level with regard to temporal administration needs to be identified. For example, when you just look at finance and accounting and budgeting alone, right? There's a bunch of stuff. I mean, accounts payable, who pays the bills and how? Bank account reconciliations, bank deposits, forming the budget and tracking that, financial reporting, payroll processing, group purchasing opportunities, getting finance councils more involved in how to manage them. So how would this get implemented? From a diocesan perspective, before phase one, I'd really like Jesus Christ himself to appear and give it his approval. But I know that's not going to happen. But at the moment, we're looking at a 4-phase approach. Phase one would be the formation of a leadership team that would oversee the development and engineering of the process. Included with that would be getting feedback from pastors and parish leaders, as well as conducting educational sessions to explain those benefits. Phase two would be developing job descriptions and hiring plans for additional central and regional staff. Also, what are the systems that would use to coordinate everything? And finally, what does the framework look like in terms of parishes funding this model? And we'll talk more about that. Phase three, selecting 5 to 7 parishes for testing. The goals would be to monitor efficiency and effectiveness, the cost savings, and if the pastors are satisfied with how we're doing. Then phase four, gradually onboarding the remaining parishes within a region or deanery. Ongoing assessment and any parts of the process that need to be refined and evaluated if the model is sustainable long-term in our performance. We're convinced there would be a lot of benefits to moving to this model. The improved efficiency and effectiveness of parishes from a temporal administration standpoint would be vast. The whole point of this is to reduce the burdens that pastors and parishes have now with administration on their own. Same systems would be in place from parish to parish, so there's no reinventing the wheel when pastors move to new assignments. We'd have even more standardized processes, and pastors reclaim time for spiritual and ministerial work. And I would add significant cost savings to parishes as well. Parishes would have to pay for it, but we feel that in the Diocese of Fall River anyway, we can save parishes more than 20% of what they're paying now for salaries and benefits under this new model, which could free up cost savings to perhaps reinvest in pastoral staff and/or programming. And what does that mean, reclaiming that time? So the goal of the Hope is to be more teaching and sanctifying, right? Getting pastors and lay leadership back to what it was like in an earlier time. And the pastor could be also be more involved with parish ministries, energizing existing volunteers and engaging new ones for whatever ministries are at the parish now, or even new ones they want to establish in the future. Sounds good, right? Well, not so fast. And I know I'm being a little cynical here, but there's going to be some pain points that pastors are going to have to consider during the planning of this model. Probably the biggest thing they'll confront is the impact on their staff dedicated to temporal administration. What's going to happen to them? How much will this cost the parish? What's the future of our vendors? Some of these folks are friends of mine. Does that mean we're not going to be doing business with them anymore? Some pastors are actually more comfortable operating in the temporal administration space. Some might not know how to up their game with teaching and sanctifying when the time comes. No disrespect to any priests or pastors here. Skepticism about the value we could provide. Is this really going to work? Will I be losing control? Will I no longer have a say? And lastly, I tried to make the font look haunted here. Distrust of the Chancery or Archdiocese. I know this is a huge issue. I'm not sure why. In Fall River, anyway, we've gone to great lengths over the past 10 years to rebuild trust. Yet there's some priests, staff, and parishioners that are still wary of who we are and what we're trying to do. But we keep moving forward. And this has everything to do with change, right? Change is challenging for us all. There are also going to be issues with trust that I'll get to in a minute. You'll hear me talk about two terms or themes that come up over and over: empathy and good communication. But as for change, a lot of reasons. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. We sort of see what's coming and say to ourselves, I don't think I want to be a part of that. After all, many of us are creatures of habit and need to be in control, right? A lot of us fear criticism or anger as a result of driving change. Maybe some of us have had negative experience with change and already have preconceived notions. Thinking about what you have now and how that may be on the table, that can get unnerving, right? I know as each new chancellor came in when I was working in Boston, there was always the apprehension of what the chancellor was going to be like and who they were going to like or dislike and what it meant for you and your position. So I get it. The same goes with pastors, parish staff, and parishioners. Pastors may say, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And ultimately, we don't want to fail. Thankfully, we understand that there must be good communication and conversations during the process. Conversations allow people to be part of the change process. And I've heard that conversation is the source and soul of change. Let's talk about trust for a minute. So there's a really good TED Talk on trust. I don't have the name of the woman in front of me, but she points out that there's 3 legs to trust: empathy, logic, and authenticity. And if you have all 3, you can build trust. But if any one of those legs are wobbly, then trust is in jeopardy. Empathy is the ability to understand another person's or group's thoughts and feelings in a situation from their point of view, not just your own. If you are the diocese, or if I'm the diocese, we want to listen to what the thoughts, comments, questions, and concerns are of everyone that's going to be affected. You need to make them feel like they've been listened to and that you understand their points of view. Next comes logic. Logic is going through why the process needs to take place and what the process is going to be. Nothing to hide, all out in the open and frank discussion. Once people understand your logic, they're more apt to trust that there are good reasons why we're doing what we're doing. Maybe not pleasant, but still logical, okay? Lastly, authenticity. And that's when you're conveying information that's from the heart, and you're not just saying things that you think people want to hear, all right? It makes more sense being upfront about the pros and cons of how this change is going to take place. And it makes more sense to speak from the heart about the process, even though it can be tough. And there's going to be instances where people are going to be out of a job, right? And just a few words about managing conflict, because we all have conflict and confrontation at times. We must recognize it and get it out in the open in a spirit of full transparency and communication. There may be misinformation going around about what we're trying to do. And as I've learned, there's not just two sides of the story, there's like 5 sides to the story. And we must make sure all viewpoints are respected. The pastor, parish staff, and those of the diocese. Everyone must feel like they're on equal footing. Everyone involved during any conflict needs to be respected and afforded the ability to cooperate with one another. Conflict is ultimately about loss. So identifying what's at stake and seeing if there are any workarounds. Everyone in the process should be prepared to make some sort of concessions. Have I mentioned all of this is pretty hard? It's easy for me to preach about it, right? And in terms of lay leadership, as we implement new models over time, there'll be more opportunity for lay leadership to get involved with the pastor in parish with regard to pastoral and ministerial functions. With the pastor having more time, in theory, to spend in these areas, he's also going to need more help because we're already behind the 8 ball with declining mass attendance. We need to get people back as well as new people through OCIA. Lay leaders need to follow the pastor's lead and be aware of the experience that he brings. It will take the pastor time to adjust when he no longer has to be involved with a lot of the temporal administration he once was heavily involved in. There'll need to be new recruits who want to help, so help them identify who those people are. Help drive any new and improved processes or ministries, and lead by example when helping to implement any changes. And be ready to assist with lingering fears of change, conflicts, and trust issues. So being practical about the way forward. So I've worked for the church long enough to know that you need a lot of patience when planning something new, especially when planning something of this magnitude. I'm not idealistic about it, and I know it's going to be a struggle, but at the same time, I know it has to be done. And where there's a will, there's a way. And we can never underestimate the resistance to change. As I mentioned earlier, what could have been a relatively seamless process to convert every parish and school to a new payroll platform, it took us over 2.5 years, all right? As I mentioned, the most practical way to implement any new model is on a pilot basis. And eventually, we will reach out to the pastors who are traditionally on board with things and who already don't think certain things can't be done. Small wins will build momentum. You know, we'd like to get to the point where there are pastors who, the pastors that aren't on board, talk to some of the guys who are on board, and they're hearing about the great benefits of the change. And finally, time management is going to be key. Most archdioceses and dioceses are staffed a mile wide and an inch deep, and seminaries included. Trying to pull something like this off while at the same time still trying to manage the day-to-day, it's going to be challenging for us all, to say the least. So before I wrap this up, just some conclusions. Doing nothing is not an option. It's simply not realistic with the number of priests we have and are going to have that things can work the way they used to work. There aren't enough hours in the day for the priest/pastor to truly be that. Without better models of temporal administration, pastors are going to continue to burn out, and then who replaces them, right? And as I mentioned earlier, pastors need to be convinced that these models are designed to enhance their priesthood, not take away anything from it. The teaching and the sanctifying are going to continue to suffer unless we address the governance and temporal administration problem. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the church today isn't what it was 50 years ago. And finally, this has more to do of sort of this culture of control that has been promulgated over the years and years and years, and lack of trust than anything else. Our job is going to be building trust, while at the same time convincing pastors that giving up some control in one area will give them more control in other areas. All right, wrap up. So I'm at the end of my talk. No one clap yet. Final thoughts, and the first one I already mentioned with pastors managing multiple parishes. Our church of the future, and this is my opinion, should be one parish per suburban community and perhaps 3 or 4 parishes per urban community. And what we have today is not sustainable. Archdioceses and dioceses now have ongoing processes of collaboration, unifications, mergers, and closures. And these processes are here to stay. When I went to Fall River, I think there were 84 parishes. We're down to 69. And we really need to get to between 45 and 50. So we still have a ways to go. Because if you look at the capacity relative to the mass attendance, even if we were to double mass attendance tomorrow, and we'd all be high-fiving each other if we double mass attendance, right? We still only need 50 parishes in Fall River. This Fall River is an example. So in order for pastors and priests to thrive, dioceses and archdioceses, they have to get to that, whatever that right number of parishes is. And addressing the temporal administration and governance, that's not going away either. Most importantly, the success of our church lies with the success of the presbyterate. And I was saying to Father Dennis before we started, priests are our center of gravity, right? That's a military term for source of strength. The situation today for pastors and priests is untenable. And if we can reduce the number of churches while at the same time improving on the temporal administration and governance, pastors and priests will have more time to do what they were actually ordained to do, and not the other way around. Without this being resolved, it's going to leave pastors and priests less and less time to evangelize. And always remember that the diocese and the good folks that work in it, in its parishes, are one team, okay? There shouldn't be this us versus them mentality. But I know that's a reality because I do hear it in the diocese a lot. That's cultural and it's going to change over time. And if we keep working at it, we're all on the same team, at the end of the day. So stay in touch. I really appreciate you being a part of this session today. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'd love to help you in any way that I can. So please feel to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email. You can call my mobile number. So thank you and God bless. At this time, I'm happy to take a couple questions.